Thanks everyone for being here. I'll echo words for Hunter, and also thank you for serving. Serving in Olympia is not fun. So I'm very passionate about this state. You know, probably one of the biggest reasons why I stood up to run for Congress is because of the condition of our state. I love this state. I'm never leaving this state. This is where I live. This is my home. This is where I built my life. This is where I raise my kids. And I'm not going anywhere. I will use every ounce of energy and effort that I have once I finally get elected to Congress to be able to help with what's going on here in our state. I was endorsed by President Trump for Congress. We won the last primary decisively. We were outspent by 13 to 1. We just barely lost the general. Being outspent by millions of dollars and still coming in, we were one of the last 5 races across the country to be called because it was so close. But I'm still fighting. I will never give up on this. I believe this is what God's called me to do. And every single year, many of you have known me for several years now, I just get smarter, stronger, wiser, more support, understand what our country is supposed to do, what it's not supposed to do, know more of the dirtbags and more of the good people in Washington, D.C., which does nothing but help me. I want to take you through just a few of the things I've been working on the last few months. So today, we were up in Canada. The point of it really was to go talking to Canadians about what they think about President Trump's plan to make Canada the 51st state. We'll put a documentary video out about that soon. A few months ago, I went to Panama. Made a documentary down there that is now on YouTube. That was a lot of fun. I've been there before. I took our kids there. We homeschooled our 3 kids, and we had made a trip to Panama many years ago. I'll just give you one little fun fact, well, maybe a couple. So the original Panama Canal was opened and paid for by the United States. The United States actually freed Panama from Colombia because the Senate in the United States had sent an offer to Colombia to be able to build the Panama Canal, and Colombia rejected the offer. And so the United States backed Panamanians for their freedom, and obviously successful in that, literally sending military troops down there. And then they were able to sign a treaty, which was a perpetual treaty, meaning it's forever, with Panamanians to be able to build the Panama Canal at our expense. That was over 100 years ago. What most people don't know about is the post-Panamax for the new Panama Canal that was also paid for by, guess who? The United States. And that opened in 2016. That canal is designed, it's over 180 feet wide. It's designed for Chinese vessels that can carry over 20,000 containers. So that's 2016. That was not very long ago. We're still paying for it. We have provided military support from day one for 120 years for Panama. The canal is ours. It will always be ours. The documentary is very clear. It supports President Trump's position, and you should go watch it. I did another project for DOGE where I redesigned FEMA, because FEMA is a disaster. I wrote a 70-plus page report, also did a video on that, and I'm going to be presenting it in Congress. FEMA's a mess. I thought that the DOGE review of FEMA would take me, I'm serious, I thought maybe three days. I ended up spending 10 weeks on it, and I finally just had to stop. I got invited back to the Army Parade in DC, which was great. I loved it. It was awesome. I'll just give you a little bit of tools for when you're talking to people, if they're still complaining about the so-called $47 million that the parade cost. The military, the U.S. military spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on recruiting. And I'll tell you, the number one thing that happened to our military, and I'm very concerned about this, because the last few years, with all the defund the police stuff, I'll keep the language clean, and anti-military and weak military and just people that shouldn't be in the military, it's made me concerned from a systemic standpoint that I don't know that the kids that are growing up today and tomorrow are going to grow up saying, Daddy, I want to be a fireman, or I want to be a policeman, right? And you start to see the problem society-wise if our kids aren't excited about those kinds of things. That really concerns me. That entire ship turned course when we elected President Trump. And the military is on fire, and put Pete Hegseth, really not somebody you would expect anybody to ever put in a position like that, and he is kicking butt. And so the parade was amazing. I'll just tell you, and I've got a bunch of pictures from it, but I'll say the most memorable thing from the parade for me was, first of all, it was really cool. They did all the themed era uniforms. So they had companies, or whatever they call them in the Army. I was in the Navy, so I don't know some of the lingo for the Army, but they had them in, like, you know, the Revolutionary War uniform, and then, you know, I mean, all the way down through time. It was like amazing, down to the boots and everything. I was like, wow, this is really cool. The thing I loved the most, they had all kinds of era equipment rolling through, but the people, some of the people driving the tanks were driving down Constitution Avenue, and they were doing this to the crowd. And I don't know why, but that just, like, seeing those members of the Army, like, feeling supported, feeling like the country cared about them, feeling like they had some patriotism to stand up for. If there's anything that motivates me, it is the 1.2 million people over the history of our country have given their life in our military in order for us to have the freedom that we do today. So to see that positivity coming through our military, to know that myself and many of you in here also served and risked everything, up to and including our lives, in order to make sure this continues. I will say that anybody who is involved in politics, including every single one of you in this room, is putting it on the line once again, because it is that important that we make sure that our kids and our grandkids have a future here. I actually wrote a book. I'll tell you a little bit about that. I got to go to the Middle East for 3 weeks ahead of President Trump's visit. It was amazing. I've learned so much, unbelievable. Those are very long flights, and a lot of flights. I've probably been to DC 10 times just in the last year. I had some time to work on this book. This is a draft copy. It is the only copy in existence. This is an author's copy. Once it gets submitted, they send you a copy to basically look through and see if it's how you want it before they go into mass production. Let me just tell you, this book is called How We Broke America, and a checklist to fix it. The premise behind this book is I've listed 46 things that have caused the fracture of our country. This is a checklist for how to fix our country. This book should be available in the next 2 or 3 weeks. During the last campaign, Dan Newhouse knew that he was going to lose, and the only way that he could beat me was to lie. And so he told all of you that I wanted to raise taxes. He said I wanted to raise taxes by 30%. You guys remember that? Which is a total lie. I never would have gotten Trump's endorsement if I was a pro-tax person. I'm 55 years old. I own my property. I've worked my whole life, worked my butt off in the trades to be able to buy my property. I don't have a mortgage. The last thing, I hate property tax. I think there should be a moratorium on it. We either ought to eliminate it, or it ought to stick at what it's at when we buy the property. Dan Newhouse targeted the older voters. I have all the postcards. I imagine you guys probably got them too, but we know that they targeted those. So first of all, he sent all the Democrats postcards bragging about voting for impeaching President Trump. Second, he sent postcards to everybody, but special ones to voters who were over a certain age, to make sure that they were fearful about what I was going to do to the economy should I get elected. Writing a book is my counter to that, because people our age and older generally have respect for people who are an author. And so part of my doing this is not just because I believe this is what God's put in my heart, and this is absolutely what we need to do as a country, but it also helps to claw back some of those older voters who might have lost faith in me because of the lies. There's a case in the Supreme Court called Fick versus Facebook. Are you guys familiar with the Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act? And that's basically the section that big tech used to censor us over the last few years on social media. So there was a case that I actually signed on to one of the amicus briefs that got sent to the Supreme Court, and basically, if the Supreme Court would have taken up this case, it would have fixed the disparity and the problems with the entire censorship industrial complex that's been made through the internet. They didn't end up taking up the case, very sadly, but I did make some trips back to DC. I got to meet with a lot of members of Congress, and on the last trip, when we were basically at this final push of because we're trying to get members of Congress to sign on to a letter that we can send to the Supreme Court to say, hey, we really want you to take up this case because the lower courts have messed up the precedents. They didn't understand the issue. And I tell you that because I think that our structure of our country was built in such a way that regular people could run it. Regular people like you and I. But I think now, with the position that we're in, we need some extra. We need some people who understand, the original intent by David Barton, and they can go back and be like, no, this is wrong, and here's why. Not just voting because that's where my party is voting, but to actually go in and say, you know what, it's structurally wrong that our Congress does not have debate anymore. It's wrong, and here are the reasons. The 17th Amendment is harmful to us, and it's very harmful right here in Washington State, and here's the reasons why. That's what we need, those kinds of people right now. And I'm not saying that I'm extra special, I'm just saying that I've spent the time to study, and I've worked really hard to understand this stuff. I don't really care about the notoriety. I don't really care about the naysayer. How can you do this when that person just said this about you, or that thing just happened, or this thing just happened? I'm just you know what? My focus is on the end goal. That's my critical path. I don't really care what all these people are doing or saying. So other questions?
That's something Trump would say.
How do you get those other 22% to vote?
The biggest problem in our country can be summed up in it as this. It's two words: ignorance and apathy. And we tend to think ignorance is a bad word because, somebody might say, Isaac, you're ignorant. And it's we would be offended by that. But really, what are they saying? They're saying, Isaac, you don't know. That's, we just don't know, right? And what happens when you don't know? You become apathetic and you don't care. So don't know and don't care are the problems with our country. If more people knew, they read the Declaration of Independence, they read our Bill of Rights, they understood our rights, they understand that our rights are natural from God over all man, we just happen to be lucky enough to live in a country that has it documented in a constitution that we can stand in court of law and defend ourselves with. And when more people understand that and they know it, all of a sudden now they care. So knowing fixes not caring. That is the problem with our country. If you want to see the voting go up, I feel like we have to figure out how to overcome the ignorance and the apathy. It's not easy to grow things. I have a lot of respect for we raise cattle, but that's a lot easier than growing stuff.
Sometimes I beg to differ.
There's a lot of courage. I'll put that.
You're right.
What other questions you got?
Just win.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna keep fighting. You don't realize this, but we're less than 13 months from the ballots hitting your boxes for the next primary. President Trump signed an executive order on the dams, by the way, to help protect our dams. That's a big issue for us. 60% of our energy in Washington comes from hydropower. We need to push more of that. We need to push more nuclear. We need to get this lunacy. Since we did natural gas, we probably need to get more. Frankly, the truth is we still should be using coal power. What was the problem with coal power? Number one, it was dirty to extract, and it was harmful to people, the workers, right? And number two, it was dirty to burn. Well, guess what? Now we have equipment with closed cabins and air conditioning filters. It's no problem. You can work till you're 78 years old, pulling coal. And number two, we have exhaust scrubbers on the engines that are burning coal. Why can't we use coal? Why can't we promote this in different countries? We have China pushing photovoltaic to countries in Africa. They can't afford it. They need coal. They need power. We need cheap energy. Read about Leland Olds and the work that he did to make sure all Americans could have cheap energy. It's incredibly important for us to have that. So, go ahead, Isaac.
I just have one more question about energy, and that was, I've heard that in the next 5 years, that 95% of our electrical capacity will be used to support data farms or data centers because of AI.
Yeah.
And that if it's 95%, they said, well, maybe we'll have a nuclear plant per data center, right? So I know that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have plans to build nuclear plants. Is this part of it? And do you think that's exaggerated, or do you think that we actually will use 95% of our grid capacity if we don't build more grid or capacity.
There's no way our current grid capacity can handle the data centers that are being built right now. I mean, there's no way. So there has to be more generation.
You talk about it, you hear people talking about when you're
Yeah,
using
and within PUDs, I go to the like regional and state PUD meetings, and it's been incredibly helpful for me over the last few years to learn about that. I'm also traveling to India in August because there's a company there that has a very state-of-the-art energy generation method that they're using that will completely change the world if what they're doing is actually true, and I think it is. I was talking about the dams, and I didn't finish, but I'm going down to Southern Oregon, Northern California in a couple weeks to view the Klamath River sites where they took out the dams down there. And I'm telling you, I've already talked to people down there, it's a complete disaster. I'm thankful that President Trump has the executive order to protect our dams, but I'm going to do a documentary to show the real damages that are caused when you take out these dams.
American values do not align with leftists because they hate America. We must engage by giving our dollars and our talents to defend our great American values. Visit JerrodSessler.com to donate and get involved. Say yes to America.